Okay, so from 2011 through 2023, the 49ers have consistently had more talented rosters than any other organization in maybe sports. They've had Hall of Famers, amazing coaches, and even with that, you know just as well as I do that since 1994, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, the 49ers haven't won anything of note. And trust me, you don't just accidentally waste as many loaded teams as the 49ers did. There's so many people to blame that you've probably never heard of that we just need to start right away. So without further ado, let a Raiders fan have a little bit of fun, and let's go through a tale of tragedy, betrayal, failure, and most of all, comedy, to figure out why the San Francisco 49ers never won a Super Bowl despite being the best team in the NFL for so many years.
And the Saints win!
Cannot play with them, cannot win with them, cannot coach with them, can't do it.
The year is 2010, and the San Francisco 49ers were god-awful. In this season, the Niners were primarily coached by Hall of Fame linebacker Mike Singletary, who to this point had done a great job collecting his paycheck and dipping, because all he did in 6 seasons helping coach San Francisco was try and convince them not to draft the future Hall of Famer Patrick Willis, and then got fired as the team's head coach, meaning the coaching search for the 49ers going into 2011 could be a franchise-altering one if they got it right. And they did. Led by CEO Jed York and general manager Trent Baalke, they convinced Stanford's Jim Harbaugh, the hottest coach in the market and also a pretty good football mind, to walk away from the college scene despite maybe the greatest college player ever, Andrew Luck, deciding to stay for another year. And after a steamy 6-hour session, Jim Harbaugh was sent a limousine and had a red carpet rolled out for him because San Francisco. And then on January 7th, 2011, Jim Harbaugh became the 49ers head coach, and thus the entire NFL ecosystem was thrown into chaos. Now, part of the reason why Harbaugh took the job was the talent on the roster. The offense featured guys like Frank Gore, Joe Staley, Michael Crabtree, Vernon Davis, and Alex Smith, which were some fun toys for sure, but the defense is where the world-altering potential lay dormant. I mean, Jim Harbaugh, a passionate coach who's perpetually one really bad call away from a Xanax-induced heart attack, casually stumbled upon the best linebacker duo probably ever in Navarro Bowman and Patrick Willis, as well as the Smith duo in Justin and Aldon Smith, which, you know, with all that talent, you'd think analysts would have had the 49ers ranked a little bit higher than the 23rd best team in the NFL coming into 2011. Alex Smith was definitely not a respected NFL quarterback at the time, but people really should have seen what was to come when Jim Harbaugh himself was going through training camp drills full speed, even with a lockout limiting the work they could get in. And when week 1 came around, it was clear this was a different 49ers team. Ted Ginn returned a kickoff and a punt return for a touchdown versus the Seahawks, with Harbaugh's energy coursing through this organization's veins. And wow, what a great special teams unit this 49ers team has, am I right? I mean, I can't wait to see what they have in store in the playoffs. By year's end, Jim Harbaugh's 49ers won 13 games, the second most wins by any rookie head coach ever, and this team was just a crushing powerhouse. Alex Smith proved to be a solid game manager, but all eyes went towards the defense, where Justin Smith, Patrick Willis, and Navarro Bowman all made all-pro teams, leading one of the best run defenses of all time in 2011. It was bewildering to see a team this good against the run. They allowed the least rushing yards in the league, tied for the least rushing yards per carry, and allowed by far the least amount of rushing touchdowns in the entire NFL, with 3. Only 3 times did a running back cross the goal line versus the Niners all year. However, for how good the 49ers were, the Saints and Green Bay Packers had Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees, and because of their quarterback advantage, they were the favorites to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. However, because this is football and Alicia Nelson Manning, the great sorcerer of the unknown realm, walked the lands, the 15-1 Packers fell to the Giants in the divisional round, and that left the 49ers to deal with the Saints in a battle of 13-win teams in just the divisional round. The game between New Orleans and San Francisco was an instant classic, and slid perfectly into Chapter 5, Volume 13 of the Drew Brees Torture Series, as despite a Herculean effort to take a 32-29 lead with a minute and 37 seconds left on the clock, the Saints' third worst pass defense completely folded. Just a disgraceful performance, and the 49ers converted a go-ahead game-winning touchdown to Vernon Davis, advancing to the NFC Championship game. Somebody give this man a hug. Regardless, the 49ers could not have asked for an easier road to win it all. A home game in the NFC Championship versus a team that wasn't the Packers or the Saints, and best of all, they were healthy too. Pretty much the only guy listed on the injury report for the 49ers was returnman Ted Ginn, so great, let's do it. Let's see Jim Harbaugh's 49ers go out there and just destroy a Giants team that had less Pro Bowlers on it than the entire 49ers special teams unit combined. But when the game began, possibly due to weather, nerves, and the Giants just doing Giants things in the playoffs, somehow the 49ers looked like the better team by a pretty wide margin, but at halftime, they were losing 10-7, and the offense looked completely stale outside of a breakaway touchdown to Vernon Davis, and overall the team just looked so sloppy. Luckily, Vernon Davis made another big play, but it didn't matter. It just didn't matter. Eli the Great used his prominent mind-controlling abilities to help NFL hero Kyle Williams just barely grazed the ball with his knee, and next thing you know, both offenses missed multiple opportunities each, and we're going to overtime tied at 17 apiece. I wonder if we'll ever see anything like this ever again with the Niners. The pressure was at an all-time high. This is how champions are made. There was battle going on in the trenches, the lights were bright, and whoever would make the first mistake would surely lose the game. The Giants then punted the ball back to the 49ers and were faced with a routine play. You've done it at least 100,000 times, but with a Super Bowl on the line, I guess things just feel a little different. And right on cue, Kyle Williams, the beacon of all good things in life, fumbles again. And instantly, it was over. Eli Manning and the Giants won the game 20-17, taking away a golden opportunity for the 49ers to win it all under Jim Harbaugh. Now, let's be clear here. Kyle Williams blew this game, and the season as a whole, but the 49ers offense was actually just bad versus the Giants. Alex Smith proved to be the first quarterback in a long line for San Francisco that just didn't have that X-Factor ability in him, and in the entire NFC Championship game, Smith completed one pass to his wide receivers. Just one, with the 49ers also going a putrid 1 for 13 on third down conversions. So Jim Harbaugh and offensive coordinator Greg Roman definitely shouldered some blame as well. Still, though, the 49ers had a strength to build on, and that was defense. And alongside Jim Harbaugh's no-nonsense, just play-to-win style of football, he also made a message very clear to his players that he will not tolerate people who beat women. That is a big no-no for him. What a progressive thinker, right? And so to make sure everyone was on the same page here, the 49ers went out and signed Parrish Cox, who had been released from prison days earlier for sexual assault. What? Just a classy move from this model franchise, am I right? And then the 49ers continued to strike out by having Trent Baalke just flub the entire 2012 NFL draft. Their first-round pick was A.J. Jenkins, a receiver who is an excellent choice for the worst draft selection ever, finishing his entire career never catching a single pass as a 49er. And then the misfortunes continued as the football gods made sure that Jim Harbaugh wasn't able to convince Peyton Manning to come to San Francisco to take Alex Smith's job, because honestly, if the eternal forehead was a 49er in 2012, we might just be talking about the greatest single-season team of all time. But it didn't happen, and also, Olden Smith got stabbed twice at his own party, but whatever, I'm sure he'll clean his act up, so it's fine. Like, how do you even have an offseason that bad after such an amazing regular season? And still, the worst thing the 49ers did was fall for the system quarterback trap, giving Alex Smith a 3-year deal, locking him in as the 49ers QB until 2014, putting a dangerously low ceiling on this team's offense going forward. But just because the Niners quarterback play wasn't absolutely elite doesn't mean Jim Harbaugh wasn't about to field an even better team in 2012. The 2012 49ers retained all 11 starting defensive players, and the offense stayed pretty much the same too, so it was no surprise when the Niners jumped out to a 6-2 start. And then in Week 10, accidentally, the best thing that could have ever happened to the 49ers did. Alex Smith was playing great football, but in a Week 10 game versus the Rams, Smith suffered a concussion which led to former second-round pick Colin Kaepernick taking over the reins as the 49ers' new starting quarterback. This is what we like to call pure luck in the football world, folks. And, you know, it can happen once, I guess, but surely this won't happen again where the 49ers just get a very needed power-up boost in the middle of the season from a backup quarterback, right? No way it'll happen twice. Now, before we go any further, let's take a step back. Almost every single time a Super Bowl contender loses its starting quarterback in the middle of the goddamn season, that's it. It's over. But of course not with these guys. Turns out, Colin Kaepernick is amazing. And in his first start versus the Bears, Cap had a day, going for an ultra-efficient 250 yards and 2 touchdowns, while Aldon Smith, his draft buddy, also chipped in a light 5.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles, and now things are just getting out of hand. This team was already a juggernaut. It's not like Alex Smith was bad, but sure, whatever. At midseason, let's give a team that has 9 All-Pros. The same amount as the goddamn 2007 New England Patriots, seemingly a clone of Cam Newton from the future. And after Harbaugh made the decision to stick with Colin Kaepernick for the rest of the year, the Niners finished the season going 11-4-1 and were honestly just better than everyone else after the quarterback change. The Packers couldn't stop them as Kaepernick ran for a QB playoff record 181 rushing yards and 4 total touchdowns, and the Falcons almost had it, but they have their own issues to get into for another time, and after holding a whopping 17-0 lead, they blew it, and slowly but surely the 49ers relied on their all-time great defense and guys like Frank Gore's veteran presence to make it to the Super Bowl, handing the Falcons their worst loss in franchise history. And now it was time for the Harbaugh Bowl, as the 49ers would be facing Jim's brother John and the Ray Lewis Last Dance Baltimore Ravens, but somehow they came into this game as pretty big 4.5-point favorites, depending on where you look. However, although on paper the 49ers looked like overwhelmingly the better team, in one game, anything's possible, and behind the curtains, this Niners team was barely limping to the finish line. Justin Smith and Aldon Smith both had very good cases for being the 49ers' most valuable player in 2012, as Justin put pressure down the middle while Aldon reaped the rewards and casually dropped 19.5 sacks on the year. But in Week 12, Aldon went down with a torn labrum, and even worse, in Week 15 versus the Patriots, Justin Smith tore his tricep, not something you can just, shake off. So although both guys played through their injuries, the Smith duo as well as the Niners defense as a whole looked noticeably mortal as the season faded into the playoffs. And coming into the Super Bowl, I can guarantee you their health was not improving whatsoever. Basically, just know before Justin Smith's injury, the 49ers allowed 14 points per game, and since the injury, they've allowed 28 points per game. And pair that with the team's overall nature of just blowing out a team or getting blown out, and what you get is the perfect recipe for a Baltimore Ravens feast. I mean, early on, San Francisco just couldn't get any pressure on the GOAT himself, Joe Flacco, but things really got out of hand once LaMichael James, another gem from Balky's 2012 draft class, fumbled again, and this back-breaking turnover gave the Ravens the ball back in the second quarter, and instead of the game potentially being 10-7 in favor of the Niners, it was 14-3 Ravens. I mean, wow, that is 2 years in a row of a back-breaking fumble in the biggest game of the year, just gutting the Niners raw, and boy, I can't wait for more. The 49ers just got tossed off the top of the slide and slammed into cold, hard pavement. Clearly, they weren't prepared for all 6.7 inches of Joe Flacco and Purple Heart recipient Jacoby Jones, with Baltimore seizing all momentum there was, jumping out to a massive 28-6 lead. And then the lights went out.
Half the power in New Orleans Stadium, the Superdome here, is out.
Anything short of a natural disaster or the lights forcing the game to be suspended would have resulted in the 49ers probably just losing by 50. Conspiracy theories aside, the lights went out for about 40 real-time minutes, giving Jim Harbaugh's squad and clearly rattled quarterback Colin Kaepernick a chance to regroup, reload, and get into a rhythm, and they did. In the second half, the offense started cooking. Frank Gore and Crabtree were popping off, and the defense came up massive in the third quarter to keep the 49ers in the game, but then after scoring a touchdown, the Niners just couldn't pick up a crucial 2-point conversion, which had the potential to tie the game. Kaepernick and Gore screwed up the blitz pickup, and the fade to Randy Moss fell incomplete. Yes, Randy Moss was actually on this team, meaning after Justin Tucker knocked down a field goal, the 49ers were forced to score exactly a touchdown to win or lose the Super Bowl. Simple as that. But please, do not forget the 2012 49ers were one of the most talented teams in NFL history, and the NFL's third all-time leading rusher took the 49ers inside the 10-yard line, and the goal could not be any simpler. 7 yards. Just 7 yards separated the 49ers from eternal glory, and for Jim Harbaugh, a sweet, sweet victory over his own brother. On first down, they ran the ball. Nothing. Second down, once again, nothing going at Crabtree. Third down, same thing, and all of a sudden, good lord, it's fourth down. Colin Kaepernick, for all intents and purposes, was a rookie quarterback going against Ray Lewis and Ed Reed in the greatest 7-yard war in human history. And so, Kaepernick, expecting the blitz, lobbed it up to Michael Crabtree again, and nothing. The ball fell incomplete, and despite the physical play, Jim Harbaugh completely agreed with the no call, calmly assuring the official he did his job well, and that was it. One of the most talented teams in NFL history lost in the Super Bowl. They lost in heartbreaking fashion again, but you could make the case that if 2 or 3 fumbles bounced a different way, the 49ers could be 2-time Super Bowl champions under Jim Harbaugh and could be considered a potential dynasty. But at least going into the offseason, they didn't really need to make any changes to the roster because they were still completely stacked, and instead, their biggest problem was the storm that was brewing up north, becoming more and more lethal by the day.
The Seattle Seahawks select Russell Wilson.
Kaepernick wide open and making the catch, and what a shot!
Pete Carroll and the Seattle Seahawks were a problem. And for the rest of our entertainment value, Pete and Jim Harbaugh absolutely hated each other. At a coaches meeting, Harbaugh basically said he couldn't stand Pete Carroll, and that was after last year's Week 7 matchup when Harbaugh was honking his horn at the Seahawks team bus. And that didn't sound right, but you know what I mean. And Jim Harbaugh really made sure as many people knew the Seahawks were cheaters too. So, safe to say, he was not a fan of the Legion of Boom. But this is fine, okay? You can talk as much trash as you want. As long as you back up your play on the field, I don't really see a problem with it. Anyway, the 2013 season began, and other than Crabtree tearing his Achilles in the offseason and like 10 dudes getting arrested for DUIs, including Aldon Smith, all was well, and as the year came to a close, the 49ers were hitting their stride at the right time. They won 6 straight games with Crabtree returning to end the season, going 12-4, becoming undefeated when Jim Harbaugh was wearing cleats. And although the Seahawks beat the 49ers out for the number 1 seed in the NFC, the NFL food chain was set and clear. The Denver Broncos, maybe the Patriots, Seattle Seahawks, and San Francisco 49ers were realistically the only 4 teams that could be hoisting the Lombardi Trophy by February. In the wild card, the most talented team in the NFL on paper still came into Lambeau Field and took down Aaron Rodgers, handing him his second of 4 playoff losses to the 49ers, off of the back of a great defensive performance and Micah Hyde just dropping a pick 6, but whatever. Then they moved on to Carolina to face a quarterback who wasn't Aaron Rodgers, and was in fact the young Cameron Newton playing in his first ever playoff game. How cute. And just like what happened in Lambeau, the Niners defense was way too much. Patrick Willis, Aldon Smith, Navarro Bowman, they were all just too good. And meanwhile, Colin Kaepernick eventually woke up, and along with their new receiver they stole from Baltimore, Anquan Boldin, the 49ers ran out the clock after holding a double-digit lead and advanced to the NFC Championship game for the 3rd straight year under Jim Harbaugh. Expectedly, the Seattle Seahawks would be the 49ers' opponent in this game, and seconds after the Panthers game ended, the whole world knew what we were in for. An absolute bloodbath. Bodies would be bagged, Harbaughs would be gymmed, and more likely than not, the winner of this game would go on to win the Super Bowl. And this is football at its absolute peak. I still remember the hype going into this game, and still to this day, I'm not sure I've seen a game as physical as this NFC Championship battle. I mean, they even had a wall of zebras out before the game just because they knew things were about to get ugly, and thus, the war began. And right away, Russell Wilson fumbled the ball, which basically shut down the sous chef's confidence for the first half, and the Niners jumped out to a 10-0 lead, with the 49ers front 7 clearly getting into Russell Wilson's head. But eventually, they got the run game going with Marshawn Lynch, and in the 3rd quarter, the game was tied at 10-10. It was neck and neck the whole time, but then the 49ers had a prime chance to ice the game. After fumbling but getting a lucky roll, and then a perfect pass from Kaepernick inches over Earl Thomas for a touchdown happened, with 13 minutes and 52 seconds left on the clock, Pete Carroll rolled the dice. A weird clock problem and pretty terrible running into the punter call led to the Seahawks putting confidence in the offense to get it done, and so on 4th and 7, the 49ers did everything as wrong as they possibly could have. It was downright impressive. Not only did they jump off sides for the free play, but they botched their coverage anyways, and Jermaine Kearse scored to give Seattle the lead. Incredible choking work so far as Jim Harbaugh just stood on the sideline in utter disbelief. And as warfare waged on, the 49ers were only getting weaker and weaker. Early on, Mike Iupati, arguably the best lineman in football, was ruled out mid-game, and Navarro Bowman suffered a torn ACL and MCL on one of the most disgusting injuries in sports, and would miss the whole 2014 season too. So that was just a massive turning point in the game. But still, Jim Harbaugh's team did not quit. 4th down and 2, with the season on the line, they converted. 3rd down and 2 on a play that was picked off earlier, they converted as well. And now it was all coming together. Their time had finally come. This team that was experienced, they've been to the NFC Championship and lost. They've been to the Super Bowl and lost. And with 31 seconds left on the clock, the 49ers prepared for the biggest play ever in the Jim Harbaugh era. And the question now was, who do they go to? Anquan Boldin and Vernon Davis seemed like great options, as they were both over 6 foot tall receivers, and hell, maybe they could even try and get Kaepernick out in space to stress the Seahawks secondary and force them to cover more ground. I mean, yeah, they could do that, or they could choose an entirely different path. In 2013, Richard Sherman was a demon. A demon. And since he entered the league, the man has been the best cornerback in football with by far the lowest passer rating in the league when targeted. And knowing this, the 49ers avoided him for most of the game to varying success. So, back to the play, where for some ungodly reason, the 49ers decided now was the time to test the talents of one Richard Kevin Sherman. And what resulted was one of the most iconic plays in NFL history. The aftermath was just peak. The 49ers were heartbroken for the 3rd year in a row, and Sherman showed his dedication to sportsmanship by calmly requesting a handshake from his dear friend before he praised the game of his fellow NFL peer in an interview. And from the outside looking in, you could still make the case, if the 49ers were even luckier than they already were when it mattered most, they could be a dynasty, a team with 3 straight Super Bowl rings, but instead, they had 3 L's on their resume. And although on the surface it seemed like the Jim Harbaugh era that had clearly been one of the greatest success stories in NFL history was continuing to roll smoothly, little did we all know, out of the public eye, just how horribly toxic things had begun to get in the front office. Including the playoffs, in 3 seasons on the job, Jim Harbaugh had won 41 games, lost 14, and tied in just 1 game. This was a man who was on pace to be one of the greatest coaches in NFL history, and with all of that success came flowers, almost all of which going to the players and their outspoken animated coach in Jim Harbaugh, leaving CEO Jed York and GM Trent Baalke behind. It's a conflict as old as time. The general manager or owner just feels like they're not getting the credit they deserve, and we can debate for hours and hours about if Jed York's ego being hurt was really all there was to his falling out with Jim Harbaugh, but after trying to read every source out there, I couldn't figure out why, for the life of me, these professionals who make millions, if not billions of dollars, just all of a sudden started hating each other after such a successful 3-year run. And then I found this. On July 18th, 2014, Jed York, whose main focus for a while now had been opening a new stadium for the 49ers in Santa Clara, finally got the chance to release his $1 billion piece of matter. And I saw this picture, and it just kind of hit me. A bunch of powerful NFL employees, including the Roger himself, are all wearing suits. All of them. And then you see Jim Harbaugh standing off to the side wearing what he always wears. The same 49ers sweater, the same hat, and the same $8 khakis. To Jim, this was never about money or politics or anything like that. The man just wanted to win football games. And from the very beginning, his beliefs were just inevitably going to clash with the 49ers front offices, no matter how well he was received by fans and players alike. And so, before 2014, York, Baalke, and others began their quest to get rid of Jim Harbaugh at all costs, instead of, extending him, obviously. So the first thing they tried to do was straight up trade the man. Fresh off of 3 straight NFC Championship appearances, the 49ers tried to sentence Jim Harbaugh to the worst possible fate imaginable, coming very close to a trade with the Cleveland Browns. However, reports say that Harbaugh himself was the one to shut down the deal, basically pleading for his life, meaning York and company would have to take more drastic measures to get rid of Jim Harbaugh. If you want to take down a warrior in battle, shoot his horse first. So Jed York and the 49ers began to control the media narrative around the Niners, beginning a tirade of leaks to the media, with reporters saying they have on good authority from sources with inside knowledge that Jim Harbaugh is losing the locker room and all the players just hate him now. Now, while the 49ers were doing everything they could to tear down the 49ers, the players were also doing their part in orchestrating the destruction of the best roster in football, with players getting arrested for assault, linebacker Ray McDonald for beating his 10-week pregnant girlfriend, and Aldon Smith also finally got charged for all his crimes before and suspended for the first 9 games of the 2014 season, and he also added on to his charges by saying he had a bomb in an airport, so, you love to see it. So, in a sick way, having Ray McDonald beat his pregnant girlfriend was actually helping York push his agenda, because this sort of accidentally formed a narrative that Jim Harbaugh's once zero tolerance for arrest, especially domestic violence ones, was starting to crumble. Colin Kaepernick also signed a 6-year contract, so he's about to be a 49er until 2020, which will be fun, and with that, let's get back into football, where, unlike in previous seasons, the 49ers actually began to struggle and just did not look like the same team at all. I am dead serious when I say the offseason was a clear clusterfuck, but the 2014 regular season might have been worse. First off, Colin Kaepernick dealt with a foot injury for most of the year and regressed significantly. Turns out, if you take some of that athleticism away, a lot of his flaws as a player came to the surface. He locks onto his first read, forces the ball into tight spaces, and just can't read defenses very well. And besides the offense struggling, the coaching drama just kept going so strong, with the front office still refusing to extend Harbaugh for a multitude of reasons, but publicly they said Jim shouldn't be paid like a Super Bowl winning coach because, well, obviously he hasn't won a Super Bowl, and although York will learn much later on that this was a bit of a mistake, for now, his philosophy was, if Jim wanted to win the Super Bowl so badly, he would have been the one running the fade route at the end of Super Bowl 47. And Jed York and company just would not let up, sending their minions everywhere to give information to people in the media, like Trent Dilfer, Jay Glazer, Deion Sanders. All these guys were leaking basically the same reports, saying inside trusted sources told us that Jim Harbaugh has lost his players' respect, and by year's end, even if they win the Super Bowl, Jim Harbaugh will no longer be the head coach of the 49ers. But it wasn't all over yet. In Week 8, the Seahawks and 49ers were both sitting dead even at 4-3 records, so the division could easily still be in their grasp, but after a Week 9 loss to the Jeff Fisher Rams, where Patrick Willis suffered a season-ending injury, that was pretty much it. They did have one bright spot with rookie linebacker Chris Borland just casually becoming one of the greatest rookies ever in the 3rd round, but the 49ers would finish the season going 8-8, including an iconic Thanksgiving loss to the Seahawks, where Jed York tweeted out to the world how clearly terrible Jim Harbaugh was at his job, and heading into the final week of the season, everyone knew what was about to happen. This internal duel was going on for months. York and the executives would fire shots only for Harbaugh to perpetually try to defend himself. My favorite being when he told Jed York to get out of a meeting because it was for men only. And eventually, though, the dust settled, and Team Balky/York emerged victorious when on December 28th, 2014, Jim Harbaugh and the San Francisco 49ers agreed to mutually part ways. Now, obviously, if you're listening, you'd know that was a damn lie. They just fired Harbaugh straight up. But they had finally done it. It's time to celebrate. The cancer that was Jim Harbaugh had finally been removed. The 49ers were winning too much football, and luckily Jed York was here for the better of humanity to put a stop to it. And with Jim gone, the locker room can finally be restored to its former glory. So, let's see how the players felt about Harbaugh being gone. Well, Patrick Willis retired, Frank Gore went to Indianapolis, Mike Iupati went to Arizona, Chris Borland retired as a rookie, Justin Smith retired, Michael Crabtree and Aldon Smith went to Oakland after potential conflicts with Colin Kaepernick and a girl, Anthony Davis, a solid lineman, retired, and Andy Lee, their all-pro punter, went to Cleveland. So, everyone left. That's probably just a coincidence, though. I mean, surely this had nothing to do with how the front office dealt with Jim Harbaugh, and those players that left would feel real sorry when a new head coach who's even better than Jim in every way, shape, and mustache was brought in, as the 49ers hired, or I guess promoted, their defensive line coach and former interim head coach, Jim Tomsula, to be the official head coach of the 49ers, a hire that Jed York compared to the Warriors bringing in Steve Kerr. Time out, okay? What Trent Baalke and Jed York did to the 49ers in the early 2010s should have just had them locked in a torture chamber for decades, okay? It was criminal. It was criminal what they did. This team had everything you could ask for and they got nothing out of it. They didn't win a single Super Bowl, and all they had to do was just sit there, shut their mouths up, cast the checks, and watch the rings flow in. But couldn't do it. It was too hard. So, in other words, with Jim Harbaugh being gone and the 49ers completely falling to irrelevance, balance was restored to the NFL world. No woman will ever be able to hurt me the way Jim Harbaugh toyed with my emotions during that 4-year span, but it was all over now, and in 2015, the 49ers were already completely off the tracks, but their deserted train was looted and blown up for sport in the regular season, with Jim Tomsula's 2015 squad winning just 5 games, and his entire tenure as 49ers head coach can pretty much be summed up by him just ripping ass mid-press conference. So that season concluded with Kaepernick's official benching for 49ers icon Blaine Gabbert, and then in 2016, after almost hiring Mike Shanahan, which would have just been an insane timeline, the Niners instead went with Chip Kelly, where he helped the 49ers defense that just 2 years prior was one of the best units of all time become so far and away the worst defense in football. I mean, they allowed Fozzie Whittaker to run for 100 yards on them. I'll give you $4 if you even remember who that man is. This 49ers team that had 0 Pro Bowlers went 2-14 on the season, fired Chip Kelly, their head coach, and finally fired Trent Baalke as well. But I just gotta say, this was maybe my favorite football team to watch ever. 1 week, banners were being flown over the stadium to get rid of Jed York. Another week, starters were getting arrested for assaulting 70-year-olds and stealing brisket sandwiches. It was just so wild to see a franchise fall this hard this quickly. I mean, it was peak Niners football. So, the San Francisco 49ers spent 2 years in the dark, and then before the 2017 season, the Niners hired the calm and collected under pressure Kyle Shanahan to be the head coach, and a former Fox analyst and safety John Lynch to be the general manager, both decisions that came with definite skepticism at the time. Regardless of the general public's feelings and whether it was even morally fair or not, Jed York would get a second chance, and immediately, luckily found another offensive mastermind and a GM who could put together a great team. I mean, dude got a second chance that 99% of people don't get, and all he had to do was sit in his luxury box and shut his ass up. But the football gods don't forget that easily. And although the 49ers, obviously, as you know, have rebuilt extremely fast, you don't just ruin a potential dynasty under Jim Harbaugh and get away scot-free. And as York will come to realize, the price he has to pay for his failures will be far greater than he ever could have imagined. The 2017 NFL season marked a new age for the 49ers, and right away, it went so far south, it looked like the Cleveland Browns were just going to be switching colors. The first draft under John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan needed to be a foundation-establishing draft, and, it was, as they drafted one of the biggest busts in NFL history in Solomon Thomas 3rd overall, and then with their second first-round pick, they took linebacker Reuben Foster, who dealt with injuries and, let's see here. Oh yeah, he beat women too, so, at least the 49ers were staying loyal to their culture of class. Then, after failing to trade for Kirk Cousins, the 49ers were forced to roll out old reliable C.J. Beathard, a third-round rookie for most of the season, as the Niners raced out to an 0-8 start, and thus the race to see whether the Browns or the 49ers would win a game first was underway. I mean, this season was just so much fun. Or at least it could have been more fun, but the 49ers decided to ruin everything by trading for some hot guy or something, I don't know. And as the season came to an end, the 49ers actually started to win games. Granted, it was versus terrible teams, but Jimmy G threw for an efficient 300 yards per game and didn't lose a single contest in any of his 5 starts. And even though Kaepernick was only banished 1 year ago, the 49ers just, found another franchise quarterback instantly. That sounds pretty nice. So to keep a positive tone though, let me just remind you that Kyle Williams fumbled twice in the NFC Championship game. The 2018 season was also pretty much a wash, and it honestly should have set them back for years to come, but it turns out it did the complete opposite. Before the season, they signed the traitor Richard Sherman fresh off of an Achilles tear that was considered to be a career ender, and in just week 3, Jimothy Garoppolo tore his ACL and was ruled out for the season, leaving the door open for tank commanders Nick Mullins and CJ Beathard to lead the troops into battle to lock up another horrid campaign where they finished 4-12. However, like I said, this accidentally worked to their advantage. Because of their terrible record and lost tiebreakers, they were able to jump both the 4-win Jets and Raiders in the draft to go all the way up to the 2nd overall pick, where they selected the politically open-minded and free-thinking Nick Bosa. And as the 2019 draft concluded, the young talent that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan had begun to collect was getting frankly ridiculous. From 2017 through 2019, in 3 straight years, the 49ers didn't exactly crush every single pick they were given, but they followed a tried and true formula most teams that become elite for years to come have succeeded with. Make sure you leave every single draft with one impact player at least, and they did just that. George Kittle, Fred Warner, Deebo Samuel, Dre Greenlaw, these were all guys drafted in the 2nd round or later, and they just constantly kept finding gold in the later rounds, and that's not even mentioning their 1st round picks like Mike McGlinchey and Nick Bosa, much to the delight of President Trump, of course. So by losing Jimmy G for 2018, that set off a butterfly effect which led to the 49ers even having a chance to draft Nick Bosa, which all set up the 2019 49ers team, which on paper had so much potential. They just needed to be healthy and put it all together and they were going to be amazing. I mean, the defense had 5 first-round picks on it, including Dee Ford, and they also signed Kwame Alexander in the offseason to bring even more firepower to this Robert Saleh coach defense. And what do you know? Just like that, you blink once and the 49ers have another top 5 coach, top 5 offense, and top 1 defense, as the Niners jumped out to an 8-0 start, coasting to a 13-3 finish on the season, with all 3 losses coming by just 1 possession. I mean, this team was dumb. Jimmy G was a serviceable quarterback in the way Alex Smith was, but with weapons like Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and Kyle Juszczyk, it wasn't even a little bit of a problem. However, what the 49ers really lacked was a Frank Gore-type workhorse back that all Shanahan offenses needed to even think about functioning. So, they just signed some random 27-year-old running back named Raheem Mostert, who just decided to be amazing at football in his 4th year in the league because San Francisco 49ers. Awesome. So the offense, led by Kyle Shanahan, was deadly efficient, and the defense, more specifically the defensive line, was showing shades of 2011. Eric Armstead, Nick Bosa, DeForest Buckner, and Dee Ford formed one of the best defensive lines in NFL history, and the rest of the defense was, fine too, with Fred Warner and just... This isn't fair! Their linebackers were Fred Warner, Kwame Alexander, and Dre Greenlaw, with Richard Sherman and Jimmy Ward manning the secondary, and they did all this in 4 years. Now, this was all nice and good. The 49ers had another one of the most talented rosters ever assembled, as you do, but they still had to go out there and actually live up to their potential, which, so far in the postseason, they did. The Kirk Cousins-led Vikings never stood a chance, and the 49ers got to play Aaron Rodgers again, this time in the NFC Championship game, so you know how that went. And off of Jimmy Garoppolo's Herculean 8 passing attempts, the San Francisco 49ers were back in the Super Bowl, and I'm sure Jed York thought for maybe just a second that Jim Harbaugh's ghost would finally leave him alone. So the Super Bowl began, and unlike the Ravens game, Super Bowl 54 versus the young Kansas City Chiefs was tight for the whole first half. It was tied at 10-10 going into the 3rd quarter, and both quarterbacks clearly looked nervous, but then the Niners started to pull away off of the back of their defense that seemed to just get better and better with all the rest the offense was providing them. And then things just started going their way. Raheem Mostert got in the end zone, and then holding a 20-10 lead with 12 minutes left in the game, Patrick Mahomes threw his 2nd interception, and the 49ers promptly celebrated in the end zone like they had just won the Super Bowl because, well, they basically did. On the next drive, the 49ers attempted a 6-yard run, a solid play call. Then they hit George Kittle for 12 yards. This was a perfect position to win a Super Bowl, and Kyle Shanahan has been here before. Once upon a time, as Atlanta's offensive coordinator, the Falcons had a 99.6 chance to win their Super Bowl, which I'm sure you've never heard this before, but the Falcons actually did go on to lose that Super Bowl to the Patriots. And now at this point in the game, the Niners had a 96.1% chance to take home a Lombardi. 96.1. And so with this knowledge, Shanahan looked at his play sheet and said to himself, all right, I think it's time to air it out. It's Jimmy G time, bitches. And the 49ers proceeded to give the ball right back to Kansas City, who scored a touchdown, and then on their next drive, they burned a grand total of 54 seconds off the clock before punting it back to Kansas City, again putting their exhausted defense right back on the field. What happened next can only be described by one word. Collapse. Jet Chip Wasp happened, Sammy Watkins cooked Richard Sherman, Damian Williams went Super Saiyan, and even with all that, Jed York's 49ers still had a chance to do what Jim Harbaugh never could. All they had to do was trust in Jimmy Garoppolo to hide the 49ers' biggest weakness under Kyle Shanahan, and that would be proving that they can come back from deficits by throwing the football. It was now or never. Would Jimmy G prove that he could be this franchise quarterback that everyone thought he could be at the end of 2017?
Pass is nearly picked. Sanders downfield is overthrown.
The 49ers blew it. Jimmy G overthrew Emmanuel Sanders looking off a wide-open Kendrick Bourne, and after another Kansas City touchdown, that was it. Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers completed one of the greatest Super Bowl choke jobs in the history of sports. After the game, Chief Safety Tyrann Mathieu was very appreciative towards Kyle Shanahan for completely taking the run game out of the playbook as the 49ers finished the Super Bowl, a game in which they had a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter with the fucking ball having the second least amount of rush attempts in a game they've had all season. But you know, at least if you make this mistake once in the Super Bowl, by God's will, if the 49ers find themselves in the Super Bowl with this exact same core, then there's no way Kyle Shanahan would do this again, especially if his running back would be like, I don't know, the best player in the damn league who won the Offensive Player of the Year. That would never happen. Surely not. Surely not. So they blew it again. And to punish Jed York for even getting close to winning a Super Bowl, the 2020 49ers would have a close encounter with the plague of death. Before the year, they did have some important roster changes though. They stole Trent Williams away from the Commanders and also the Chiefs in a trade bidding war, and then they basically just swapped DeForest Buckner, one of the most underrated players in the league over the past decade, for Javon Kinlaw, who turned out to be an absolute disgrace to the position itself. Anyway, like I said, this season for the 49ers never had any chance. They suffered the second most injuries out of any team since 2000. Nick Bosa, Jimmy Garoppolo, Sherman, Kittle, and Debo, all massive pieces went down with major injuries. And there's just not really anything else to say other than that. If the 49ers were healthy, they would have been a contender, but instead they only won 6 games all season long, meaning they would hold the 12th overall pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, where John Lynch was ready to make the biggest trade the franchise has ever made. Jimmy Garoppolo was fine, maybe even good for the most part, but the man clearly did not have that dog in him. And you know who did? Trey Lance. Coming out of the football breeding grounds known as North Dakota State, he was an athletic, mobile quarterback who really had the 49ers believing they were seeing the second coming of Russell Wilson, and they just could not let him go through their grasp. But that was probably Plan B, because Plan A at the time had to do with a certain disgruntled sleeping giant in Detroit by the name of Matthew Stafford, and he wanted out. So the 49ers began their pursuit, and it seemed like they really could land Stafford. Then, Matthew Stafford just happened to run into Sean McVay, the Rams coach, on a vacation, and after being a few shots deep, Sean McVay made his business pitch to Stafford while also convincing the Lions to just not listen to anyone else for trade offers, and the Rams would acquire Matthew Stafford in a trade with Detroit, putting all the pressure on the 49ers. This sent a massive snowball effect in motion where the 49ers felt pressured to trade up in the draft to grab Trey Lance, giving up 3 first-round picks, and so much more for a quarterback who at best won't be ready for 2 years, and all that while the Rams walked away with a grizzled, hungry veteran for 2 first-round picks in Jared Goff. Now, a trade as disastrous as this one should have set the Niners back for years at least, but it didn't, and We'll get there in a minute. However, the 2021 season did not go as smoothly as many predicted it to go. Through Week 7, the 49ers were 2-4, and following an embarrassing primetime loss to Carson Wentz and the Colts, Kyle Shanahan was faced with a similar situation that Jim Harbaugh was once presented with. Does he make the switch to the younger Trey Lance to try and give the team a little bit of a spark plug, or does he stick with old reliable Jimmy G? Shanahan chose to go with Garoppolo, which should have been a red flag for Trey Lance immediately, and because the team didn't have many injury issues and were still absurdly talented, they were just barely able to go into a Week 18 game with the Rams for a chance to make the playoffs. And against Matthew Stafford, the man who should have probably been their quarterback, the 49ers miraculously won the game, and now that they were in the playoffs, right away they became everyone's favorite dark horse team to just win it all. Led by an all-pro season from Deebo Samuel and the emergence of rookie running back Elijah Mitchell in relief of Raheem Mostert tearing his ACL, the 49ers offense went right back to being ruthlessly efficient, and things just kept working out for them. The Cowboys did an exceptional job of taking themselves out in the wild card, and then, because Aaron Rodgers just still cannot beat the 49ers in the playoffs no matter what, the Niners were back in the NFC Championship game for the 5th time in a decade, and their opponent was none other than the Matthew Stafford-led Los Angeles Rams, a team they've beaten 6 times in a row at this point. One game was all it took to return to the Super Bowl, and although this 49ers unit wasn't their strongest team, 2021 was one of the weaker seasons in recent history. So when in the fourth quarter, the 49ers held another 10-point lead, they just needed to close it out to be able to play against the goddamn Cincinnati Bengals in the Super Bowl. No disrespect. Shockingly, the 49ers did not hold on to this lead, and in the entire fourth quarter, Kyle Shanahan decided to give the ball to Deebo Samuel, their best player this year, a grand total of, once. Fucking one time. So Jed York watched in horror as Kyle Shanahan did the thing again, then a Jaquiski Tartt drop on a Stafford arm punt led to the Rams tying the game, where, once again, with the Super Bowl on the line, Jimmy G just couldn't deliver. Aaron Donald ended the game, and for the second time in 3 years and counting, the 49ers fell to the eventual Super Bowl champions. Another year, another crushing playoff loss, and I think honestly this would be undoubtedly a generational blown opportunity for any non-Kyle Shanahan coach team, but you know, whatever. Who cares if they still can't win now, because the Trey Lance era has officially begun, and with every TikTok hype video that was made, the 49ers ceiling in 2022 only got larger and larger. Until it all just completely ended. As the man partially responsible for the premature death of one Robert Griffin III, Kyle Shanahan decided to run as many quarterback draws up the middle as he could for reasons, and after a few tries, Kyle finally got what he wanted, I guess, in Trey Lance, the 49ers franchise quarterback, who, to be fair, was looking like absolute trash, broke his ankle in week 2 and was out for the season. The 49ers were one more player going down away from just spontaneous combustion. The team was still loaded beyond belief, but they just didn't have a quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo was still here after a weird contract situation in the offseason, but he's not going to elevate the team whatsoever and can't leave the pocket without his life alert just in hand. But regardless, John Lynch made a bet that this was the year the 49ers would finally break through and sent away a used condom and 8 bags of Funyuns to the Panthers in exchange for the best running back in the NFL in Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey turned out to be a cheat code for the 49ers. Behind a great run-blocking O-line and Shanahan's scheme, he was the perfect running back to flourish in the Niners system, except the quarterback problem still remained, and it was the only thing holding this team back. If Jimmy G had gotten hurt, the 49ers would be dead. And sure enough, their world came crashing down when Jimmy Garoppolo broke his foot and would be ruled out for the year versus Miami. So there are lucky draft picks in the NFL, right? You know, you got your Tom Brady's, your Shannon Sharps, guys that were overlooked by everyone, even the teams that drafted them, or else they wouldn't be drafted that late. But I would say, pound for pound, given the value of the round and the player's actual on-the-field production, in about a decade or so, there will be no draft pick considered luckier than Brock Purdy. Jimmy Garoppolo goes down, leaving the last pick in the NFL draft to come in the game. And guess what? Brock Purdy was exactly what the 49ers were missing. This organization just keeps finding franchise quarterbacks on the sidewalk, and I'm sick of it. And all of a sudden, Brock Purdy is leading the 49ers to an undefeated record as a starter, and the Niners once again became a team that nobody wanted to face in the playoffs. You know the drill at this point. Geno Smith and the Seahawks were just a worse team in the wild card, and the 49ers cashed in their free Dallas Cowboys ticket in the divisional round to face off against the Philadelphia Eagles in one of the most predictable NFC Championship matchups you'll ever see. Also, this is Josh Johnson. He's the backup for the 49ers right now, so, just thought I'd mention him right now for some reason. Just seemed appropriate. The Eagles and 49ers began to duel, and honestly, the Eagles did just look like a better team and showed it early on. And when I say better, that includes not having Kyle Shanahan as their head coach, because if the man had simply challenged this Devontae Smith catch, the tide of the game would have been completely different. Still though, you probably know how this game ended. Jim Harbaugh's spirit possessed Hassan Reddick to slice Brock Purdy's arm in half, and Ndamukong Suh would do the same with Josh Johnson's head, and what ensued was one of the most pathetic second halves you'll ever see, where the 49ers just didn't have a quarterback, being forced to hand off to Christian McCaffrey every play, and they were absolutely throttled in the NFC Championship game, 31-7. Well, it is what it is, whatever. Time to run it back again with the most talented roster in the NFL again, and hopefully a different result will happen this time, finally, right? I mean, at this point, it's kind of a statistical anomaly how the 49ers haven't even accidentally won a Super Bowl with this many loaded teams in 15 years, and I would argue this 2023 49ers roster was the most talented possibly in their franchise's history. They were just that good. Brock Purdy broke efficiency records across the board and almost won the MVP. McCaffrey was far and away the best running back in football and almost won the MVP. Debo and Kittle were great. Trent Williams was still the most immovable object on the field despite his age. And the defense was still led by the same guys in Fred Warner, Bosa, Greenlaw, and Armstead. But along the way, they also gained some newcomers. Talanoa Hufanga, Brandon Ayuk, Charvarius Ward, and Javon Hargrave were all guys that I failed to mention before, but now they were just casually Pro Bowl level players at least. So that's fair. 60% of Polamalu would go on to tear his ACL, but they had so much depth it wasn't even a season-ending blow to their secondary at all. And so, predictably, this team with like 6 potential Hall of Famers on it was the Super Bowl favorite for pretty much every week of the season, becoming one of only 2 teams to be favored in every single game they played in the entire season, and finished the regular season with a dominant 12-5 campaign, where anything less than a Super Bowl win in one of the weakest seasons in recent history again would be a cataclysmic disappointment. But still, somehow, Jed York just couldn't do it. No matter how fast he ran, Jim Harbaugh just wouldn't stop torturing him from his NFL grave. And in the divisional round versus the Green Bay Packers, a team that with Aaron Rodgers were just a free win, they looked so rusty after almost a month of resting their starters. But because the Packers were bad and inexperienced, the 49ers moved on to play against the Detroit Lions, where there's nothing to say here. The Lions lost the game, the 49ers won, and this game had absolutely zero luck involved in it whatsoever. All of this, the Harbaugh era, the Shanahan era, like their 5th franchise quarterback in a decade, all of that has led them to the comedic climax of this entire franchise. All season long, nobody could even stand near the 49ers besides the Baltimore Ravens, but after Lamar had another pathetic showing versus the Chiefs, it was rematch time. Chiefs versus 49ers, Part 2, and surely Kyle Shanahan and his fucking 3rd chance will be able to learn his lesson. It's just so funny to me that this was the best 49ers team to this point, and somehow they should have actually lost both of their previous games in the playoffs. Just classic Kyle Shanahan. And also, it should be said that the Chiefs had the best player in this game on paper, but the 49ers had like the next best 4 or 5. So I never want to hear the narrative change that the 49ers weren't just expected to mop the floor with the worst team Mahomes has ever had. And they really, really should have, but the spirit of Harbaugh and Kyle Williams returned yet again. Fumble luck was just not on the Niners side whatsoever. McCaffrey uncharacteristically lost his first fumble since week 7, and meanwhile the Chiefs recovered 6 out of the 7 fumbles during the course of this second war, screwing up on routine snaps and pitches all game long, but they got pretty much most of them back. The first half for the 49ers went pretty horribly, but one moment from this game really should have foreshadowed what was to come. We all should have seen it coming, and that would be the famous moment where Dre Greenlaw just snaps his Achilles. And time will tell if he's even ready by next season, but remember, we've seen this before. Think back to the 2013 NFC Championship game, arguably the most brutal loss in 49ers history, the game that would turn out to mark the end of the early 2010s 49ers teams, and how Navarro Bowman's foul injury turned the tide of the entire game. I mean, you gotta love football. Sometimes the storylines just write themselves, and by halftime, the Niners still held only a 10-3 lead. It was incredible that they weren't able to take advantage of the fact that the Chiefs were not an amazing team whatsoever. It seemed like the lights were a little too bright for all their players. But on the other side, although Mahomes had to deal with injuries to his two best linemen, no receiving help, and Travis Kelce aging 10 years in the first half, he still gave the Niners everything he had, putting all the pressure on Kyle Shanahan to just coach like he's coached all regular season to easily close out the Super Bowl. So after the Chiefs' first drive in the second half, which involved a fumble and a pick, you would think this would be the perfect time to go to the Offensive Player of the Year and Christian McCaffrey on the ground, right? No. Shut up. You don't know anything about football. Kyle Shanahan does. And immediately they came out and attempted 2 Christian McCaffrey runs in their 4 possessions they had in the entire third quarter. Pure genius. But still, the 49ers were dominating, mainly just because of how trash Kansas City was playing, and it looked like finally Jed York could wash his hands of his crimes. And then retribution was delivered. Jim Harbaugh, in the memory of Kyle Williams, was once again fresh in York's mind, with the ball hitting the leg of a 49er on a punt. A missed PAT would happen after that. And then that takes us to the biggest play of the game. After the 2-minute warning with time to think over their strategy, the 49ers were faced with a 3rd and 4, a down that will decide the Super Bowl. Succeed to pick it up and have the ability to run out the clock to take a potentially game-winning field goal, or fail and give the ball back into the hands of Patrick Mahomes. And guess what? Shanahan got completely outcoached by Steve Spagnuolo. Purdy gets confused, and they can't pick it up. At this point, the game was outside of their control. It was all over. The 49ers had just one more chance in overtime to take it home and... Huh? Oh, they don't know the overtime rules? Oh, okay, got it. Sick. Nice work, Kyle. Are you fucking kidding me? Not only have we just gotten purely conflicting reports about who knew what after the game, but Shanahan said he elected to receive the ball so the Niners could have the 3rd possession. The 3rd! There was never a chance in hell this game would go to a 3rd possession, bro. Do you even know who Andy Reid is? Now that's it. Finally, the 49ers allowed Mahomes to have a legacy drive, and a Mecole Hardman touchdown ends the best 49ers season in near 20 years in the Super Bowl. But you don't lose to a team this inferior to you purely because of your coach. George Kittle, the best all-around tight end in football, finished the game with 4 yards. Brock Purdy just doesn't have the ability to take over games. The Chase Young trade at the deadline proved to be completely worthless, which is why I didn't mention it. And the Shanahan staple of just being way too conservative in the biggest games just keeps on costing him. Kyle Shanahan is still, in my eyes, a great offensive coach during the regular season, and there's a ton of stats to prove that, but you can't ignore that in the last 2023 playoffs, the dude was outcoached by every single coach that he faced, and at some point, his players will have no choice but to give up on him as a guy that can lead them to a Super Bowl win, because if he can't do it already, how many better opportunities can you really ask for? This isn't the same as the Bills in the 1990s, okay? This is a new level of suckitude. The 49ers have shredded 7 of the best teams in modern NFL history, and between Hall of Fame talent like Christian McCaffrey, Patrick Willis, Fred Warner, Aldon Smith, Justin Smith, George Kittle, Frank Gore, they all have 0 rings. So yeah, in a period of about 15 years, the 49ers went from great coach to great coach, stacked roster to stacked roster, and had some lucky breaks here and there, but overall, they just could not get it done on the biggest stage. And the way things have been going, if history has told us anything, the Santa Clara 49ers may have just blown their last chance with this roster. Anyways, if you like this video, then subscribe, because I got a lot of big things planned, and got a lot of videos like this on the channel too. And if you did like this video, may I recommend watching a documentary I did on the Patriots and their 2 dynasties. It's pretty good, trust me. And thanks to all my Patrons for pledging $1. It does truly mean a lot. But anyways, until next time.